Hello, this is Daniel from sound.headquarters.inc. In today's video, we are building these really cool standing panels, gobos, whatever you want to call them. But these are some panels that are on stands that you can move around your studio. They're very easy to build. I'm using just off-the-shelf materials that you can get at your local hardware store, and let's get into it. So right now, we are building the frames for the acoustic panels out of 1x4 lumber. So we are cutting our lengths to 4 feet, 2 feet, and then 22.5 inches. We need 2 pieces at that length to make the middle brace. Now we're doing all of our cuts to make the stands here. We're making our stands out of 2x4 and the same 1x4. So I'm making my legs, these need to be 2 feet tall for this client so that the panels are 6 feet tall when they're on the stands. So we are cutting 1x4 on a nice bevel right here to be the left and right posts of the stand. And then we're gonna make a 2-foot square box out of the 2x4. And then right now we are cutting the 2x4 to make the legs as well. And the legs are gonna be 2 feet long final dimension. So these cuts here are around 10 inches, I believe. I will put the calculations up on the screen. And then I'm adding a beveled cut on the top 2x4 of the stands, which you'll see when we assemble this all together, how that's gonna look. So we're getting the nice beveled cut on those. We're gonna go ahead and sand all of our cut pieces now as well. And it just makes for efficiency to kind of just bulk do all of the cuts first, bulk do all of the sanding, and then we can get to assembly. So here's the nail gun I'm using to assemble these frames. I'm using 2-inch 16 gauge brad nails. And we can just go ahead and start tacking this in. I like to do 3 to 4 nails per joint there. And just 2 feet on top, resting on top of the 4-footers, and just making sure everything's lined up. I like to make sure that the frame itself is not warped before I put the brace in, and using the nails allows for some adjustability and bending if you need to bend the frames a little bit to get them to sit more square. And here I'm just getting all my pre-drills out for the legs. So I'm just building this box out of 2x4 with construction screws. I'm using 3-inch construction screws. I'm just doing 2 screws at each corner, just a very simple box out of 2x4. And now those longer pieces of 1x4 are gonna connect on both sides of this box. This is gonna make the cradle that holds the acoustic panel. And since our acoustic panel is made out of the exact same 1x4 lumber that these 2 side posts are made of, it's just gonna fully fit the stands and have like a nice flushed fit once it's all done. So there you can see just the center portion of the stand and how that nice little bevel cut, that's just a cosmetic thing to make it transition nice into the panel once the panel screws into the stand. And here I'm gonna mock up the actual legs of the stand here. So it's just 1 piece on each side of the bottom frame and then that beveled piece on top, and we can screw that all together. So I'm just using a scrap piece of 2x4 here to kind of mock up my legs here. And I marked out with my square and my measuring tape, just consistent hole patterns. And I pre-drilled them and screwed them all in using 2.5-inch screws. You can see how those just click in right there. Have a nice snug fit, and then we can screw those in on site when we get to the install. And then here you can see how those panel frames are gonna sit inside of the panel stand. And you can see here that I actually made that box just a hair over 24 inches, just by like 1/8 of an inch. You can see that little gap right there. And that's to account for the thick fabric that we're using to upholster these acoustic panels. So just that little bit over 24 inches when you make the box for the stand, just allows for that acoustic panel to have a nice snug fit. So right now I'm just sanding off all the pencil marks I made just so that when I stain these, it looks all nice and finished. Same thing with the stands here. And then we're gonna go ahead and stain these. We're using a nice dark walnut finish as per the client's request. And then for fabric, we're using like a nice salt and pepper, black and gray textured wool. So ended up being a really nice final product here. So I'm just getting everything stained. The very bottom of the stands where it's touching the floor doesn't need staining, so it's not gonna be seen. And I wanted to make sure that the adhesion of the felt pads stuck well on just the raw wood rather than it being stained. There is the finished stain ready to dry there overnight before we go to the install. These are small pieces of 1/4 inch thick pieces of poplar, I believe. These were available at my hardware store at 4-foot lengths. And this is just to trim the rear side of the acoustic panels to hide where the staple marks are and to hide where the fabric is cut. This is just a small kind of detail piece I wanted to do for this client, just so that way when he's moving these around his studio, if people see it from the rear view, it's still going to look nice and have a trimmed edge rather than staples exposed. Those are the staples that we're using. I use 1/4 inch T50 staples and a pneumatic stapler. So I'm just going ahead and getting the rear fabric stapled on. I have tons of videos on my channel of building these if you want a more in-depth view of the upholstery process. Here is the acoustic insulation we're using. This client wanted to have 4-inch thick standing panels, so we're using the Safe and Sound by Rockwool. And I'm just cutting out a small channel there to account for the bracing that we added in the back side of the panel, just so that the insulation isn't pressing against the fabric. We want to have a nice flat fit. There's the front-facing fabric that we are using for these panels. So just getting that cut to size, making sure I have enough room on both sides to fold the fabric over. I can go ahead and get to upholstering. And it takes a little bit of finessing on those corners to get everything to lay flat. And then you want to go ahead and make sure that you trim everything nice and flat as well. That way nothing's poking out when we go ahead and add our trim right now. So I'm just getting my final measurements to account for the thickness of that fabric, just because it may be off by 1/8 of an inch off of the 2-foot mark, give or take. So I just always want to make sure I measure before I cut, especially with any trim pieces. So I'm just going ahead and getting all of my trim pieces cut and staining that new cut edge before I go ahead and tack these into the back of the acoustic panel. So I'm using these headless pins. I could have used longer ones. That's just what I had on hand, was the 1/2 inch. I would recommend using longer ones to go through if you're using a thick fabric like this. But I'm just going ahead and tacking those in. And with these headless pins, you can barely see them. You don't really need to do any wood filler. Just measuring up for my final sizes here. And I would have done a box joint, like a mitered 45 joint on these trim pieces, but these were only available in 4-foot lengths. So with the panel being a little bit taller than 4 feet, that wasn't going to work for those 45-degree cuts. So we just had to do butt joints for these trim pieces, but still turned out looking nice. Here is just the felt pads that you can put on the bottom of furniture. We're on site at the client's location now, so I'm just getting those felt pads put onto the bottom of the legs before I screw in and assemble these stands. So I'm just using my measuring tape as a spacer. It ends up being about a 3-inch spacer from each side of the interior of the stand, just to give me something consistent to make the gaps the same. And same ways here on the posts of the stands. I'm just measuring out 2 screws at the bottom, 2 screws at the top, and just making sure they're consistent on both sides. Then we can go ahead and fit our panel and just screw them in. I used, I believe, 1.5 inch wood screws just to screw those in. And that's it. It's as simple as that. There's the finished product. And if you ever need to disassemble these, you can just take the screws out of the stand and out of the panels and move them to a new location for easy transport. This is the finished product for our client here, downtown Toronto. They just wanted to have something that they could move around for when they're tracking vocals with their clients. And this is the perfect solution for him and something that he can take to another location at a later date. So thank you so much for watching. Really hope you guys have fun building your own. And this has been Daniel from Sound Headquarters. Peace out.